Have they stopped Iran's nuclear capabilities? Have they, quote, obliterated them, as President Trump said? No, absolutely not.
What was the 12-day war about? That's what Trump's calling the intense strikes between Israel and Iran, which briefly also involved the US and Qatar. The whole thing left so many of us confused, not least our viewers who've sent in a bunch of questions. I'm Sandra Gathmann, the host of an explainer show called Start Here, and to help me explain all of this, I'm enlisting Mark Fitzpatrick, an associate fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, a former US diplomat, and an expert on US foreign policy and nuclear issues. Mark, thank you for speaking to me today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Let's start with the trigger, which
Yep,
was Israel saying it had to strike Iran to stop it getting a nuclear weapon. We can talk about whether that was the real or only motive a bit later, but
right.
squarely on the nuclear issue, has Israel taken out Iran's nuclear capabilities? What do we know?
Well, if the question is, have they stopped Iran's nuclear capabilities? Have they, quote, obliterated them, as President Trump said? No, absolutely not. Even before the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency uh, put out a report saying it hadn't happened, individual analysts were looking at overhead imagery, and they could tell, no, the bombs had not penetrated deep into the enrichment facilities. And now we know that centrifuges remained intact. And we also knew from the beginning that Iran was able to take away the stockpile of nearly weapons grade enriched uranium, over 400 kilograms of it. Don't know where that is now, but that certainly will give Iran a huge start if it decides to produce nuclear weapons.
I want to take this opportunity to clear some things up because going into this, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, put out this report that everyone seemed to take bits of and run away with and draw their own conclusions as to whether Iran was building a nuclear weapon, how close it was, whether it wanted to or not. How do we square the fact that Iran has these capabilities, has this highly enriched uranium, which goes beyond the level needed for civilian use, right? And at the same time, people are saying there is no active, structured program that is in place, and there is no political green light to go ahead with building the weapon. How do we hold those two thoughts in our heads
Yeah.
at the same time?
The best way to look at this is that Iran has had a nuclear hedging strategy. Their whole policy orientation here has been to have the wherewithal to produce nuclear weapons if and when they make a final decision to go for it. And the intelligence estimates have been that they had not made such a final decision, but the capability had been getting, better and better and closer in case they made that decision. And they were within a week, maybe, or at least a couple weeks, to be able to produce the 90% enriched uranium for a nuclear weapon. And that's, I guess, why Israel attacked, because Iran was getting too close for comfort, although we can talk about whether Israel had other motivations. Now, as for the IAEA report, that report was very important. It said that the IAEA could not confirm that Iran's nuclear program was entirely for peaceful purposes. And the reason they couldn't confirm that didn't actually have to do anything with the stockpile of 60% enriched uranium. It had to do with the fact that a few years ago, the IAEA discovered traces of man-made uranium in Iran at places where Iran had never said there was any nuclear activity taking place. And that's a violation of Iran's safeguards obligations. They have to declare what they're doing on their nuclear program, under the peaceful program. And they never would do it. They never would confess. And the IEA tried for years to get them to explain it, and they never could explain it. So finally, the IEA said, "Look, enough's enough. You guys are in violation."
Hmm.
Then the second part of what the IEA, they do this accounting of how much material Iran has produced, and they said Iran had produced over 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium. The IEA actually made this accounting in accordance with that 2015 nuclear deal, which on paper still exists, but of course it doesn't exist anymore in practice. But the IEA was obliged to um, report about how well Iran had been complying with that deal, and so they make this quarterly accounting of how much enriched uranium Iran has, and yeah, we found out, wow, 600, 400 plus kilograms, enough for 10 weapons. That's really close.
Israel had motivations to take out Iran's nuclear capability, as it says. But then there was always that question of whether Trump would get the US involved. And there was a flurry of diplomatic activity that followed. Trump, of course, did end up striking Iran, but at first he appeared hesitant about getting involved. Then he suggested it was always the plan to pressure Iran in the nuclear negotiations. Why the change of heart from Trump?
It boils down to one man's almost, spur of the moment decision. Donald Trump, in his campaign for president, had talked about stopping wars, not entering into new wars. He had a lot of support for that. But after Israel attacked, Trump saw that the attack was playing very well with the American public. People were pretty happy that Israel had been able to do so much damage to Iran's nuclear program. Americans have disliked Iran for many years, ever since, Iranian students took over the U.S. embassy. And so Trump saw it was playing really well on Fox News, and he
Yeah, I
decided
saw that
to
as
join
well.
in.
I wasn't sure whether, that report would have stood up, but it was clear, I think, that Trump was acting sort of erratically based on his posts on Truth Social. And so it was really hard to follow what his strategy, if any, there was. And I think this is one of the things that makes Trump so difficult to predict when it comes to his foreign policy. And this has been the way since, Trump took office this time, is that um, there doesn't seem to be a strategy right here. Um, is
Yeah,
that
I think this is a really key point. Is there a strategy? I mean, if one man just decides to do it on the spur of the moment, was there any interagency consultation? No, as far as I can tell. Was there any intelligence assessments of how it might play out? No. Was there any strategy for the day two and how to respond to Iran's inevitable responses of itself? I don't see any of that. I don't see any strategy here at all. I think the United States got very lucky that they did damage, not at all as badly as Trump claimed. But we also were very lucky, we, the United States, were very lucky that Iran accepted a ceasefire and did not close the Strait of Hormuz, did not pull out of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, did not so far send any terrorist attacks against U.S. citizens abroad or at home. So I think Iran may be waiting for another day to respond, but so far it's been, we've been pretty lucky.
what do you make of this ceasefire? Because as so many people have discussed, if Israel's aims here weren't about squarely about taking out Iran's nuclear capability, and there was this regime change factor involved here, and let's not forget the nuclear capability strikeout hasn't really been achieved. Israel hasn't completed its war aims. So, do you think this is just essentially a pause on what is, probably all going to resume again?
I fear that it is just a pause. And you're right, Israel has not achieved either its stated objective of taking out Iran's nuclear program, nor the presumed objective of fostering regime change. Israel's attacks were so much wider than the nuclear program, the attack on the broadcasting facility, the attack on Iran's energy infrastructure, but neither of which had anything to do with the nuclear program. So it did look like Israel was trying to undermine the fabric of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And they didn't get very far in that objective. And look, it's impossible to impose regime change from airplanes dropping bombs. You'd have to do much more. And maybe security analysts in Israel were able to persuade the top leaders that, look, regime change is not possible. We should stop here. But maybe Israel is calculating that Iran will launch more attacks, and then that will be a excuse for Israel to continue the war.
Do you think the prospect of being dragged into this long regime change oriented war was something that spooked Trump?
I had thought that that was a primary motivation of his for not bombing Iran at the beginning and for asking Netanyahu to let diplomacy play out. I had thought that this was a very strong motivation for Trump, and because he had campaigned on it, and it did seem to be part of his foreign policy. But things changed very quickly, and now where do we go? Which impulse will survive in the days and weeks ahead?
How does all of this now change the nuclear negotiations with Iran, assuming they're still going to go ahead? Because as I understand it, the US negotiating team weren't demanding from the Iranians that they get rid of their nuclear program altogether. And a lot of people saw that as sort of softening their position compared to what Trump wanted in his first term. But now Trump is saying no enrichment, no weapons. Where does that leave things?
At the beginning of the negotiations in the spring, the United States appeared to be willing to accept some level of Iranian enrichment. Uh, Trump insisted that Iran cannot have a bomb, something every U.S. president has said, but that was his bottom line, no bomb. But you can have enrichment without producing a bomb. It's part of the hedging strategy I mentioned. Then Trump faced a backlash from the Iran hawks in his administration and around in Republican Party circles. They said, no, Iran cannot have enrichment. That had been the policy of the George W. Bush administration previously. Obama famously changed that, and that's how the 2015 nuclear deal came about because Obama allowed limited enrichment. Now, Trump had wanted to go back to the no enrichment policy. Okay, today, can diplomacy be revived? Iran says it wants to talk. Trump says wants to talk. But what are they going to talk about? Uh, is Trump going to lighten up his demand on no enrichment? Can't see that happening. Is Iran going to say, okay, well, now that you bombed us, we'll give up on enrichment. Uh, you win. We cry uncle. I can't see Iran, proud nation, such a historical significance, giving up this enrichment demand that has been a bedrock of their policy for decades. So diplomacy, there might be, ways around it. There had been some creative ideas that had been proposed. The idea, say, of a multinational consortium of countries producing enriched uranium outside Iranian soil. Iran says, no, it's got to be on Iranian soil. Well, maybe could it be on an island, the island of Kish in the Persian Gulf? There might be some way that they could find a wiggle room to get around this enrichment or no enrichment impasse. But it will take a lot of creativity. It will take flexibility, and I'm not sure either side has that flexibility.
And of course, the wild card is always Israel, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And just watching what Trump has been saying and listening to what he's been saying about Israel just in the last few days, has me wondering what the relationship is like at the moment. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's really changed over the last couple weeks only. Up until June 13th, um, or a few days before then, there seemed to be a level of frustration between United States and Israel, between Trump and Netanyahu. Trump was not necessarily going along with everything Netanyahu wanted. Trump really wanted to make a deal with Iran. Netanyahu was totally opposed to it. There were some differences over Gaza, not too many, but some. And then things changed. And, you know, not to be uncharitable, but it kind of looks like Netanyahu has the upper hand in this relationship.
Right.
That Netanyahu was able to bend Trump to his will. And, they had a meeting or a discussion at least the Monday before that Friday the 13th bombing. And at that meeting, Netanyahu apparently persuaded Trump to go along with Israel's bombing plan. Trump gave Israel a green light, which he hadn't given before then. So why did he give Israel a green light? Well, uh, Netanyahu persuaded him that this evil country Iran needed to be stopped, and Israel had intelligence, and Trump believed Israel's intelligence, not his own intelligence agency's estimates. Uh, so, one is, has to conclude, well, Trump gave in to Netanyahu.
Apart from Israel's strikes on Iran, which killed hundreds of people, including civilians, and Iran's attacks on Israel that have also killed people, the moves that followed were pretty calculated and contained, especially Iran's attack on a US base in Qatar, which we understood to have been a symbolic attack, where Iran was allowed, in a sense, to hit back, but in a way that wouldn't aggravate things even further. What does that say about the extent to which a lot of this has been fueled by face-saving exercises? And is that a good thing, do you think?
Uh, Sandra, I think you phrased the question so well because you differentiated between Israel's attacks it started on June 13th and followed for many days and were not foreshadowed. They killed hundreds of Iranians. And then the U.S. attack over last weekend, which was foreshadowed and did not kill anybody. And then Iran's response to that, the attack on the U.S. base in Qatar. And they told they're coming. So this was wise diplomacy, wise handling of a crisis situation, and it's something that the United States and Iran have done before when they've attacked each other to let them know it's coming. So it's a way of face saving. You've got to respond, and Iran has certainly been bragging about their attack on Ubaid Air Base. But it was a symbolic attack, as you said. Israel, part of this has not been symbolic, of course. It's not been face saving. And I fear that in the weeks ahead, that Iranian military leaders will want revenge for their fellows who have been killed by Israel, and they will respond against Israel, and they won't be, saying here's it's coming now. I think they maybe just do it. It may whether it's missiles or drones against Israeli facilities, or whether it's commando units, or whether it's terrorists themselves killing individual Israeli citizens and attacking Israeli banks overseas and so forth. I fear that may be coming.
Well, that brings me to what NATO Secretary General said to Trump in what looked like a really glowing message, thanking him for his decisive action. He said, "We're all safer." Do you think we are? I have a teacher who's written to me saying, "I have students worried about escalation in World War III." What do we tell them, Mark?
Well, I've been pleasantly surprised that things haven't unraveled so far. Uh, I don't think we're all safer. We're not safer because Iran wasn't attacking us to begin with. So we're not safer because Iran can't attack us right now. But they might be able to attack, and they're going to attack us anyway. But they might have nuclear weapons in a couple of years. So taking a longer term view of it, no, I don't think we're safer. Why did the NATO Secretary General say that? I think foreign leaders have all learned that you have to uh, praise this man in order to advance your own interests. You have to, you know, humble yourselves. And there are, NATO needs United States to remain a member. Trump had been talking about pulling out, not honoring his obligations. So I think this was Secretary General Lutti's way of keeping Trump engaged by excessive praise.
Right. And of course, the other side to that coin is not just Iran's, trajectory in terms of its nuclear capabilities, but also Israel, right? And the kind of instability that this region might continue to see if its stated war aims, its unstated war aims continue unabated.
Yeah, if it continues an effort to destabilize Iran, uh, instability will not necessarily be limited to Iran. It could have wider repercussions. And even if Iran's regime were replaced, would it be by uh, something better? I don't think if it were to be replaced, which I don't think it would be, but if it were to be, I don't think whoever came in would give up the nuclear hedging strategy or the desire to have a nuclear weapons capability. So um, I don't think Israel's war aimed there. I hope they don't pursue it.
So, how do you see the chessboard now? Who are the winners and losers out of all of this? Based on what you just said, seems Israel is on the back foot here?
If you just took a snapshot of it today and didn't think about the second and third order consequences, well, you'd say Israel is a clear winner because they took it out. They delayed Iran's nuclear program, but only for 5 months. So it's not you can't just take a snapshot. You obviously have to look ahead. And looking ahead, no, I don't think Israel is a winner in this. I think Israel has actually created circumstances where it will be worse off because Iran will be able to reconstitute its nuclear program within maybe 5, 6 months, according to US government estimates and private estimates, and then may go on to build a nuclear weapon in secret even faster than they had been doing because they may think, well, they really need a nuclear weapon now that they've been attacked. They really need the deterrent. So I think there will be this growing impulse in Iran to want to build a nuclear weapon. So no, Israel is not a winner. Iran is certainly not a winner because their facilities have been attacked. They've been shown to be impotent. Their air defenses are gone. They have no allies came to their aid, and their proxy allies had already been taken out by Israel. So Iran is certainly on the back foot. Uh, President Trump, triumphalist, claiming every day what a great strategy. He was totally obliterated the program. No, he didn't at all. I think the assessments that have come out undermine Trump's claims, but probably the United States overall is a winner because we don't want Iran to have a nuclear capability. But just as in the damage to Israel long term, is Iran will be able to produce nuclear weapons in the months and maybe in 2 years ahead, and I think they'll probably do it in secret. I've been expecting that they may kick out inspectors. And that leaves one other thing. Iran could pull out of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, undermining the global architecture, keep nuclear weapons limited in the number of people who have them. And if Iran pulls out, Saudi Arabia could pull out. Egypt and Turkey have both talked about pulling out under certain circumstances. So there could be an unraveling. I'm not predicting it, but there are many things to worry about in the months ahead.
Thank you so much, Mark, for helping us understand a bit more about what's going on. And for now, we're going to wait and see whether this ceasefire holds. Thanks again for your time.
Yeah, fingers crossed that it will hold. Thanks for having me, Sandra. This has been great.